The Secret Teachings of All Ages in Search of Parabiblical Wisdom. I'm Jeffrey Daugherty, the Christian Whistleblower. This is episode number 6 in our Secret Teachings of All Ages in Search of Parabiblical Wisdom series. We are looking at the book Secret Teachings of All Ages by Manly P. Hall. I know there's a wide discrepancy of opinion concerning Manly P. Hall, but I would encourage you to consider, for your spiritual betterment, eating the good and spitting out the bad as we go through what I consider to be one of the great works. Again, coming up tonight at 10 p.m. Eastern, about 5 hours from now, 7 p.m. Pacific, we'll have a special live show, just like this one who's live. Ask or challenge the Christian Whistleblower. I encourage the first, don't recommend the latter, but you're free to do as you will. Ask or challenge the Christian Whistleblower, coming up tonight at 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific. Let's jump right into our study on today, Atlantis and the gods of antiquity. Hall wrote this book around the turn of the century, and he says that Atlantis is the subject of a short but important article appearing in the report of the Board of Regents of the Smithsonian Institute, June 30, 1915. So it's interesting to me to note that, even though, Atlantis would be laughed at now in the august halls of the Smithsonian Institute, it's been, about 100 years since they seriously considered Atlantis and stories about Atlantis. And remember, it was Plato that wrote to us about Atlantis, and by most accounts, Plato was a fairly sharp guy. So keep that in mind as we look at this information about Atlantis and the gods of antiquities. The Atlantean hypothesis was being considered by the Institut Oceanographique, which is French, I'm saying, or believing, as it translated in the notes of the remarkable lecture that are published in the Smithsonian report. So within 100 years, the Smithsonian Institute was seriously taking the subject of Atlantis. After long periods of disdainful indifference, in the last few years, science is returning to the study of Atlantis. And that can be even said in our day. If you look and study throughout the internet, you see more serious study and questioning about Atlantis. Naturalists, geologists, zoologists, botanists are asking one another whether or not Plato has transmitted to us, with slight amplification, as writers are wont to do, a page from the actual history of mankind. Now, many of us are seeing and have studied and thought about a vast region, continent, or islands that has collapsed west of the Pillars of Hercules, otherwise called the Straits of Gibraltar, and that its collapse occurred in the not far distant past. So the idea of where this would have happened and the idea that it did happen is something that has been considered and is really continuing to be considered by science. And it's coming back again in our day. We're starting to see this, and we're starting to, hear this, and we're starting to, look at this. And I just wanted to give you an idea of what we're talking about when he talks about the idea that was west of the Straits of Gibraltar, kind of give you some type of an idea of the geography that we're talking about. Because of our public school system, geography is not exactly something that we're good on. So here's the Straits of Gibraltar, and of course, west of the Straits of Gibraltar would be over here. And how do we get rid of that? Well, anyway, let's just back out of this. So these are the Straits of Gibraltar. And when we're talking about west of the Straits of Gibraltar, we're talking about out here in this vast part of the Atlantic Ocean, right out in here. And of course, I've been, the Azores. Where are the Azores? I've been to the Azores. I'm trying to remember. I thought they were out over here. But this is the Azores right here, I believe. Yeah, that's the Azores. So and the joke there is, oh, don't worry about it. There's a woman behind every tree. Only problem is there's no trees there. So they trick you. I went there in the Air Force. So yeah, this is an idea of the Straits of Gibraltar right here. So we're talking about a continent or some islands out here in this area. And you can see, from this view that there's a lot of stuff here that could very well have been above the water. This is where we're talking about, in these areas here, of where the idea is that possibly Atlantis could have been. So you can see that there are some things out there. There are some land masses that are currently covered by water that could very well, and Plato, again, smart guy, said they're there. So I don't know, but I just wanted to give you the idea, at least, of the geography of which we are speaking and talking about there. So that would give you the idea of at least the geography of it. And, again, an idea of the possibility, because it does seem to be some landmass there that could have at some time been above the water. So it's west of the Straits of Gibraltar. It collapsed in the not far distant past. And the question of Atlantis is at least placed anew 100 years ago and even today before men and women of science. And Hall said that he doesn't believe it'll ever be solved without the age of oceanography. He's thought it natural to discuss it here in this temple of maritime science, to call such a problem blah, 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 blah. So he considered the inequalities of the basin and locations of a line from the Azores to Iceland, where dredging has brought lava to the surface from a depth of 3,000 meters. The volcanic nature of the islands now existing in the Atlantic Ocean corroborates Plato's statement that the Atlantean continent was destroyed by volcanic cataclysms. So let's see if we can figure this out. From the Azores to Iceland. So let's go back to our map and see if we can kind of look at where the Azores to Iceland would be. And I thought I was pretty good at geography, but maybe I'm not as good as I thought I was at geography. I'm pretty sure that we were looking at the Azores before. Let's see if we can find a line between the Azores and Iceland. Okay, so this would be Iceland up here. And the Azores are kind of down here. Let's locate the Azores again. Here we are. Here's the Azores out here. Oh, here's the line they're talking about right here. You see that line? That's a very definite line. These are the Azores. Had a great girlfriend from the Azores, by the way. And here's this line going up from the Azores, which are right here, a volcanic line. And, by golly, it does go right up to Iceland. How about that? And I've actually been to Iceland, by the way. And we flew from the Azores to Iceland, strangely enough. And this is where the O'Dohertys are from. So this line from Iceland down to the Azores is full of volcanic residue. And Plato taught that Atlantis died or collapsed because of volcanic activity. So how interesting is it that, could it be there's a great continent here that is sunken beneath the briny depths? Certainly some very interesting and somewhat compelling evidence from the pen of the great philosopher. So anyway, there's that. And we can continue to ponder and think about these things. I think it's very interesting. So let's go back to our text and read a little bit more about it. Studying on Atlantis and the gods of antiquities. So it does corroborate Plato's statement that the Atlantean continent was, or it does tend to corroborate Plato's statement that the continent of Atlantis was destroyed by volcanic cataclysms. And there was a French zoologist, Louis Germain, who admitted that the existence of an Atlantic continent connected with the Iberian Peninsula and the Mauritania, which would be islands, and prolonged towards the south so as to include some regions of desert climate. Very, very interesting. Atlantis, talked about by Plato. Very, very interesting. Of course, Poseidon was ruler of the sea and the island continent of Atlantis. In the midst of the sea, there was a mountain that was the dwelling place of the three earthborn primitive human beings, Evenor, his wife Leucippe, and their only daughter Cleito. The maiden was beautiful, and after the sudden death of her parents, she was wooed by Poseidon, who begat her 5 pairs of male children. Then Poseidon apportioned his continent along these 10, and Atlas, the eldest, made overlord of the other 9. Poseidon further called the country Atlantis. So Atlantis was named by Poseidon. That's very interesting. And the surrounding sea was the Atlantic in honor of Atlantis. So how many of you understood and knew that the Atlantic Ocean was named for Atlantis, son of Poseidon? That's pretty interesting. That right there is worth the price of admission. And we're coming from the Secret Teachings of All Ages and source of Parabiblical wisdom. And this is from the Manly P. Hall Classic. We'll have to take this in short bites because it is deep information. Let's get one more little bite before we give up. And before the birth of the sons, Poseidon divided the continent and the coast into zones of land and water, which were perfect as though turned upon a lathe. 2 zones of land and 3 of water surrounded the central island, which Poseidon caused to be irrigated with 2 springs of water, 1 warm and 1 cold. Now, that was thoughtful of him. Now, the descendants of Atlas continued to rule Atlantis with wise government and industry. They elevated the country to a position of dignity. The natural resources were apparently limited. Sounds like America, doesn't it? Precious metals mined, wild animals domesticated, perfumes distilled, and while enjoying abundance natural to their semi-tropic location, the Atlanteans employed themselves in the erection of palaces, temples, and docks. Sounds a lot like America. They bridged the zones of the sea. They dug a deep canal. They built a temple for Poseidon. And then Plato talks about the white, black, and red stones, which were quarried from beneath their continent and used in the construction of public buildings. Great megalithic architecture, it looks like. Groves, gardens. It just sounds like, it really sounds a lot like America being carved out of nothingness and coming to a great power and eminence. And you know the story, though. You know the story. And no king had the power of life and death over his kinsmen without the assent of a majority of 10. So there's even an idea of democracy, if you will. Very, very interesting. The Supreme Council of the Gods, Jupiter, Vulcan, Apollo, Mars, Neptune, Minerva, Venus, Diana, Juno seated upon a peacock. Plato concludes his description by declaring that the great empire did attack the Hellenic states. It did not occur, however, until their power and glory had lured the Atlantean kings from the pathway of wisdom and virtue. And here's where we get back to what I'm calling, the parallel I'm drawing between Atlantis and America. Instead of staying just content with their own wisdom and their virtue, they became filled with false ambition and set their eyes to go conquer other people like America has done. And then when the great god Zeus perceived their wickedness, he gathered the gods into holy habitation and addressed them. And what basically was concluded is that Atlantis, because of its violent nature, in a single day and night, it sank and disappeared beneath the sea. Why? Because they were not content with their great and mighty and powerful civilization, but they wanted to go and subdue and subvert other nations. And that is certainly a sobering thought for those of us that are Americans. And it's certainly a sobering thought for any of us that might think and wonder and ponder if this space that used to contain a great continent that did many of the same things that we did and have done, if that space, if there used to be a great continent here and that's what it looks like now, it doesn't take a whole lot of speculation to think of what could happen to this great continent and what it might look like if we don't turn our eyes back to ourselves and not go looking about to conquer and to take over everyone else. Because this used to look somewhat like that. This can look somewhat like that if we don't get our act together and start being the people that we used to be. Some editorializing from me. I hope that you'll permit me that. But very interesting that the story, the great story of Atlantis and the ancient gods would call us to be mindful of our current situation. And it's not just the United States of America, but many of you within the West and even many of you within, China. I actually had people from North Korea ordering books, which blew my mind over the internet. So any nation that becomes filled with avarice and begins to seek out and try to conquer other peoples is looking for trouble from the divine. And that seems to be part of the story of Atlantis and the ancient ones, that we should be. And I think Atlantis had everything they needed, self-sustaining, would have gone on forever, but they were sunk literally because they went and attacked other people. Don't let us be that kind of people, individually or collectively as a nation. So that is Secret Teachings of All Ages. I'm Jeffrey Daugherty, the Christian Whistleblower. Let's take a quick look into the chat room and see if we have any questions or comments that could add to the discussion. And let's take a quick look. I'm going to go ahead and go over and look at those. You don't have to see me looking at them. All right. Are we alone? Manly P. Hall is one of the greatest of modern time. I agree with that, Travis. Manly P. Hall did some great writing, some great work. You don't have to agree with everything about him to benefit. Again, I agree. Dr. Illusion, absolute genius. Glad you're home, Nick. Manly P. Hall tried to warn the Masons and he lost his life. Here we go. Manly P. Hall wrote a lot about Masonry before he became one. He became quite the celebrated Mason. He did. And Antarctica is a huge piece of the Atlantean enigma. I've studied it for 15 years. Feel free to share that information with me, Dr. Illusion, because that's not something that I've done. The knowledge of Atlantis came from Democratic Papri, ancient Pharaonic language. I think Antarctica, I think it could be Antarctica as well. I stumbled upon the demotic language by total accident. Dr. Illusion thinks the Druids have a hell of a lot more knowledge on these matters, which is why they were so wholesale slaughtered by the enlightened noble teachers put through the fire by the rat bastard. I agree. I work with a man who's older, and he was a Navy Seabee way back. He was stationed in Antarctica. I've read the Tuatha De Danann, and I'm amazed how the Druids were the only ones feared by Roman soldiers. You know, that is of my people, Sheena. And Shiana, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing your name right. And it's an interesting fact that I'd like to share with you with great pride, that my particular clan, the Odocartes, which was, we were known as the Destroyers. St. Patrick was from our clan because we kidnapped him. And we are the only clan, the Odocartes are the only clan that was never conquered by the English or by the Romans. We were the only ones that had never been conquered. Now, many people say they didn't conquer us because we lived out on the west of Ireland in a bunch of rocky crags that nobody else thought was worth fighting for. But be that as it may, we are the only ones that have never, ever been conquered. And I'll just show you real quickly what might be the reason why. Yeah, I already turned it off, so we won't belabor the point of why we've never been conquered, because it is Donegal is where we're from, and it is rocky and wind swept. I've glanced at it, but it's the Secret Teachings of All Ages is a very deep and long study. Very, very deep and long. Plato plagiarized. Oh, that's quite a charge, Sheena. Absolutely terrified. Hadrian built a wall to keep him out. I'm a Gnostic who believes the Christ of Irish, Native American, and Italian descent. I'm just me. Jeffrey Darty, America is the new Atlantis. It sure sounds like it, doesn't it? Democracy can be traced back. Francis Bacon wrote a book called The New Atlantis. Really? Interesting. Very interesting. Bacon drew a spell for Elizabeth to conquer America. Interesting. This is very interesting. Grew too powerful too quickly. America was to be the new Atlantis, but the church wouldn't have it. Black magic destroyed Atlantis, according to Blavatsky. Guess what we're also going to be studying? ISIS Unveiled and some of the other Blavatsky books. I've researched this, and this connection is legitimate. Oh, but how the Jesuits are working hand in glove. Bacon, D, Hall, Blavatsky. Settled in California to rebuild Atlantis. Interesting. Chris is cooking dinner and listening. Stacy was wondering if she was here. Yes, she is. John D went berserk with his Enochian babblings or dabblings. He did have some issues there. Asteroid impact. Oh, we're not talking about asteroids again, are we? Flooding for most of the land. Interesting. Does this make us stalkers? I love stalkers. There we go. So there it is. Secret Teachings of All Ages. Great talk in the chat room. Thanks so much. Don't know if I'll be back with any more before 10 o'clock. I might, but I might not. But at 10 o'clock, we'll definitely be here for Ask or Challenge the Christian Whistleblower. It'll be live just like this. I'll go in the chat room. You can ask me. You can challenge me. You're also from Donegal? How about that? And if you challenge, just make sure you're willing to get, not just give, because it will be a standoff. It will be respectful and courteous, but it will be a standoff. So I'm Jeffrey Darty, the Christian Whistleblower. This has been the Secret Teachings of All Ages in search of parabiblical wisdom. I hope you'll come back tonight. I hope you'll like, share, subscribe. Make sure you're still subscribed. And I hope you'll consider sponsoring financially. This is how we unwind our minds and unindoctrinate ourselves. And until next time, I'm encouraging you, love yourself so you can love your neighbors as yourself. I'm Jeff Darty, the Christian Whistleblower. We will see you next time.